They called it the Pacification Protocol, a systematic extermination disguised as diplomatic intervention. For 3 centuries, the Zephyrian Empire had used this same blueprint across 17 star systems. Arrive with overwhelming force, demand submission, and when the inevitable resistance came, unleash hell until nothing remained but ash and compliance. The humans of Sol 3 should have been just another footnote in their galactic conquest records. A single-planet species with primitive fusion drives and kinetic weapons, barely worth the fuel costs for a full invasion fleet. The Imperial War Council allocated exactly 72 hours for complete planetary subjugation, the same time frame they'd used to crush the crystal cities of Andromache 7. But as Admiral Kexton watched the first wave of his assault pods burning like falling stars in Earth's atmosphere, as his flagship shields buckled under a barrage of weapons that shouldn't exist, as impossible reports flooded his command center about human soldiers doing things that defied every known law of physics and biology, he began to understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology. It was their absolute refusal to accept that they could lose. The Zephyrians had made their first mistake the moment they assumed humans would fight like every other species they'd conquered. Their second mistake was believing that 300 years of easy victories had prepared them for an enemy that turned desperation into an art form and impossibility into just another obstacle to overcome. This is the story of how the most powerful military force in the galaxy learned that there's a vast difference between winning wars and surviving humans. The massive Zephyrian dreadnought, Eternal Dominion, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a predator materializing from shadow. Its hull stretched nearly 15 kilometers from bow to stern, bristling with plasma cannons that could crack continents and shield generators powered by the enslaved star cores of dead civilizations. Behind it, a fleet of 300 warships emerged from the void, their formation perfect, their intent absolute. Admiral Kex then stood on the bridge of his flagship, his 4 arms clasped behind his armored back as he gazed at the primitive blue world hanging in the darkness ahead. His species had evolved from apex predators on a high-gravity world where only the strongest survived, and their empire reflected that brutal philosophy. Tall, muscular, with chitinous plates covering their gray skin and eyes like burning coals, the Zephyrians had conquered 17 star systems through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. Scan results. Tactical Officer Vexmore, Kex then commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. The younger Zephyrian's claws clicked against his console as data flowed across holographic displays. The target planet shows standard indicators of a type: 1 civilization, Admiral, primitive nuclear fusion, chemical rockets, basic electromagnetic communications. Population approximately 8 billion. No orbital defense platforms detected. No energy shields surrounding the planet. Their largest military vessels appear to be aquatic surface craft measuring less than 400 meters. Kexthen's mandibles clicked in what his species considered laughter. 400 meters? Our drop pods are larger than their warships. He turned to his communications officer. Has there been any response to our arrival? Several primitive electromagnetic transmissions, Admiral. Mostly requests for communication and surrender demands. This time, Kexton's laughter was genuine. Surrender demands from a species that hadn't even achieved faster-than-light travel. It was almost endearing in its futility. Open a general broadcast to the planet. Use their dominant language protocols. The communications array activated, and Kexton's image was transmitted to every screen, every radio, every communication device on Earth. His massive form filled the transmission, all 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of dominion, his burning eyes fixed on the camera with predatory intensity. Primitive inhabitants of Sol 3, he began, his voice translated into dozens of human languages simultaneously. I am Admiral Kexthan of the Zephyrian Empire, commander of the 47th Pacification Fleet. Your world has been selected for incorporation into our glorious empire. You have 72 hours to cease all military resistance and prepare for administrative transition. Any attempt at organized defense will result in complete planetary sterilization. This is your only warning. The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent except for the hum of machinery and the distant thrum of the ship's massive engines. Kexton had delivered this same ultimatum 17 times before. Usually, the target species spent their final hours in panic, despair, or futile attempts at negotiation. The Zephyrians always monitored these final communications. They found the fear amusing and instructive for newly conquered populations. But the electromagnetic chatter from Earth was different. Admiral, communications officer Zur that called out, his voice puzzled. You need to hear this. The bridge speakers crackled to life with human voices, thousands of them, broadcasting on every frequency the Zephyrians could detect. But instead of panic or pleas for mercy, the humans were coordinating. All units, this is NORAD command. Confirm reception of alien transmission. Protocol 7 is now in effect. Repeat, Protocol 7 is active. European Space Command to all stations. Begin immediate implementation of Project Midnight Sunday. All civilian populations to designated shelters within 6 hours. This is Admiral Chun of the Pacific Fleet. All available vessels are to begin immediate deployment to coordinates previously distributed. The alien fleet is maintaining position at the edge of our system. We have 72 hours to show them what humans do when someone threatens our home. Kextan's eyes narrowed. Protocol 7? Project Midnight Sun? These weren't the panic scrambles of a primitive species facing annihilation. These were the calm, measured tones of a military force that had been preparing for this moment. Tactical, he barked. Full spectrum scan of the planet. I want to know about every energy signature, every installation, every piece of military hardware they possess. Vexmore's claws flew across his console, directing the ship's massive sensor arrays toward Earth. The results that came back made him pause, his four eyes blinking in confusion as he processed the data. Admiral, I'm reading some unusual signatures. The planet's energy output just increased by 300% in the last hour. I'm detecting massive power sources coming online beneath the surface, dozens of them scattered across all continents. And, sir, some of these energy readings don't match any known technology in our databases. Before Kexton could respond, his proximity alarms began screaming. The main display shifted to show space around Earth, and what the Admiral saw made his blood run cold. Ships were rising from the planet's surface. Not the primitive chemical rockets his sensors had detected earlier, but sleek, angular vessels moving with impossible acceleration. They shouldn't exist. The technology required to build ships capable of such movement was beyond anything a type, one civilization, should possess. Yet there they were, hundreds of them, streaming up from hidden bases and launching from what had appeared to be empty ocean. Combat alert, Kexton roared. All ships to defensive positions. How did our intelligence miss an orbital fleet? Sir, Vexmore stammered, his voice tight with disbelief. These aren't orbital assets. According to our scans, these ships are launching directly from the planet's surface. They're achieving orbital velocity in under 3 minutes with no visible propulsion exhaust. And, Admiral, they're accelerating toward us. The human fleet, if it could be called a fleet, was unlike anything in the Zephyrian military database. The ships varied wildly in size and configuration, from sleek fighters no larger than Zephyrian drop pods to massive dreadnoughts that rivaled his own flagship in length. But they all shared certain characteristics that made Kexton's tactical mind race. No visible weapons ports, no obvious shield generators, and acceleration curves that suggested technology centuries beyond what Earth should possess. Time to intercept, he demanded. At their current acceleration, 14 hours, Admiral. 14 hours. Less than a day for a primitive species to somehow deploy a space fleet that had been completely invisible to Zephyrian sensors. Kexton's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of stress among his people. Communications, get me the War Council. Priority Alpha transmission. The holographic display shimmered, revealing the council chamber on the Zephyrian homeworld, where 5 ancient generals sat in judgment of all military operations. General Thexkura, the eldest and most decorated warrior in the Empire, leaned forward in her massive chair. Admiral Kexthan, we understand you've encountered some irregularities with the Soul 3 conquest. General, the intelligence reports were completely inaccurate. This species possesses technology that shouldn't exist. They've deployed a space fleet from hidden installations and are moving to engage us with capabilities that exceed our own in several areas. The generals exchanged glances that spoke of ancient wisdom and countless battles. General Thexkera's 4 eyes burned with interest rather than concern. Admiral, in 3 centuries of conquest, we've encountered exactly this scenario 4 times. Species that appeared primitive but possessed hidden capabilities. Do you know what happened to those species? They were conquered and incorporated into the Empire, General. Correct. Because regardless of their hidden technologies, they lacked the one thing that has made the Zephyrian Empire unstoppable: the will to do whatever is necessary to achieve victory. You have the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, Admiral. Use it. The transmission ended, leaving Kexton alone with his doubts and his orders. Around him, the bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, preparing for a battle they all expected to win. The Zephyrians had never lost a war. Their technology was superior, their strategy was proven, and their warrior culture had been honed by centuries of conquest. But as Kexton watched the human fleet approach, something nagged at his tactical instincts. The humans weren't behaving like any species he'd conquered before. There was no desperation in their movements, no panic in their communications. They flew toward certain death with the calm precision of a species that had always expected this moment to come. Admiral, Vexmore called out, his voice tight with confusion. We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Single ship, broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Put it through. The display flickered, and suddenly, Kexton was looking at his first human. The creature was smaller than he'd expected, bipedal and seemingly fragile, with pale skin and dark hair. It wore what appeared to be a military uniform covered in symbols and insignia. But its eyes held something that made the Admiral pause. I am Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force, the human said, her voice steady and clear. I'm transmitting from a UES Defiance, currently leading the first wave of our response to your invasion threat. Kexton leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. Human Admiral, you lead your forces toward certain destruction. My fleet contains 300 warships, each one capable of sterilizing your entire planet. Surrender now, and your species will be permitted to serve the Empire as a client state. Admiral Chin smiled, and something in that expression made Kexton's warrior instinct scream warnings. It wasn't the desperate bravado of the doomed or the naive confidence of the inexperienced. It was the smile of someone who knew something he didn't. Admiral Kexton, she replied, thank you for the 72-hour warning. It gave us just enough time to finish our preparations. Preparations? You see, we've been watching you for quite some time. Your conquest of the Andromache system, your subjugation of the Kepler colonies, your destruction of the vegan civilization. We've been studying your tactics, your technology, your methods. And we've been preparing. The transmission shifted, and suddenly, Kexton was looking at a tactical display that made his blood freeze. It showed his own fleet, perfectly positioned and detailed, with overlays that indicated complete knowledge of every ship's capabilities, crew complement, and defensive systems. You've made the same mistake that 17 civilizations before us made, Admiral Chen continued. You assumed that because we appeared primitive, we actually were primitive. You never considered that a species might choose to appear less advanced than it actually is. You never wondered why a planet with our level of development would remain confined to a single star system. Around the bridge, Kexton's officers began calling out reports that made no sense. Human ships were disappearing from sensors, only to reappear in completely different locations. Energy signatures were spiking beyond anything their instruments could properly measure. And from Earth itself, massive installations were rising from beneath the oceans, installations that seemed to bend space-time around them in ways that violated several fundamental laws of physics. "What are you?" Kexton demanded, his four hands now gripping the arms of his command chair. Admiral Chen's smile widened, and for the first time, Kexton saw something in her eyes that he recognized, the look of an apex predator facing worthy prey. "We're humans," she said simply, "and we've been waiting 300 years for you to make the mistake of coming to our home system. Welcome to Sol, Admiral. You wanted to see how humans fight when their backs are against the wall. I hope you're ready for the lesson." The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in stunned silence. Outside the viewports, the human fleet continued its approach, moving with impossible grace through space that seemed to bend around them. And from Earth, more ships continued to rise, emerging from hidden bases and launching from installations that simply hadn't existed an hour before. Kex then stood in the heart of the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest: the cold touch of genuine uncertainty. For the first time in his military career, he was facing an enemy that seemed to want him to attack. The humans had turned his ultimatum into their opportunity, and Admiral Kex then was beginning to understand that in the vast chess game of galactic warfare, he might not be playing the side he thought he was. The real war was about to begin. The first shot of the war came not from the massive plasma cannons of the Zephyrian fleet, but from a human vessel no larger than a Zephyrian fighter craft. The UES Mosquito materialized from seemingly empty space directly above the Imperial formation, its hull shimmering with energies that made Caxton's sensor officers curse in 3 different languages. What happened next redefined everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about space warfare. The tiny human ship fired a single projectile, not a plasma bolt or energy beam, but what appeared to be a simple kinetic round. Kexton's tactical officers barely had time to register the weapon's launch before it struck the heavy cruiser Domination's edge, one of the Empire's most advanced warships. The round, traveling at a significant fraction of light speed, punched through the cruiser's shields as if they didn't exist, through 30 meters of battle-hardened armor plating, and detonated somewhere deep in the ship's core. The explosion that followed defied physics as the Zephyrians understood it. Instead of a simple nuclear blast, reality seemed to fold in on itself around the impact point. The massive cruiser, all 3 kilometers of it, simply ceased to exist in a sphere of absolute nothingness that expanded for exactly 1 second before snapping back to normal space, leaving nothing but a perfect spherical void where one of the Empire's deadliest warships had been moments before. "Report." Kexton roared over the chaos erupting across his bridge. "Sir, the Domination's edge is gone," Vexmore stammered, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. "Not destroyed, not disabled, gone. Completely removed from space-time. I'm reading 0 debris, 0 energy signature, 0 anything. It's as if the ship never existed." Before the Admiral could process this impossibility, proximity alarms began screaming throughout the fleet. Human ships were appearing everywhere, materializing from what had seemed like empty space with no hyperspace signatures, no dimensional rifts, no warning whatsoever. They simply existed where they hadn't existed a moment before, as if the universe itself was reshaping reality to accommodate them. "All ships, open fire," Kexton commanded. "Maximum rate, all targets." The Zephyrian fleet responded with the devastating firepower that had conquered 17 star systems. Plasma cannons designed to crack planets fired in synchronized volleys. Antimatter torpedoes streaked through space, trailing destruction. Energy beams capable of boiling away entire city blocks lanced out toward the human vessels with the fury of enslaved stars. Every shot missed. Not missed in the traditional sense of poor targeting or defensive maneuvering. The weapons simply passed through space where the human ships clearly were, as if the humans existed in a slightly different dimension that overlapped with but remained separate from normal reality. Plasma bolts that should have vaporized human vessels instead continued harmlessly into deep space. Antimatter warheads detonated against empty vacuum, while their intended targets sat motionless in the exact same location. Impossible, Kexton breathed. Vexmore explained this. The tactical officer's claws were practically blurring across his console as he tried to make sense of the sensor data. Admiral, I'm reading massive gravitational distortions around every human vessel. It's like they're existing in localized space-time bubbles. Our weapons aren't missing them. Our weapons literally cannot reach them. They're manipulating the fundamental structure of reality itself. A new transmission crackled through the fleet's communication systems, and Admiral Chen's voice filled every Zephyrian bridge simultaneously. Zephyrian fleet, this is your final warning. You have entered soul space with hostile intent against the human species. You have fired upon our vessels in what can only be interpreted as an act of war. According to the accords established by the Galactic Council 700 years ago, accords that your own empire signed, we are now legally authorized to defend our territory with any means necessary. Kexton's mandibles clicked in confusion. Galactic Council? Vexmore, check our historical databases. What is this council they speak of? The search took only moments, but the results sent a chill through the Admiral's four hearts. The Galactic Council had indeed existed, a confederation of the galaxy's oldest and most advanced civilizations that had established laws of war and territorial sovereignty across known space. The Zephyrian Empire had been a minor member state, bound by council law, until the council mysteriously disbanded exactly 300 years ago. The same time the Empire had begun its campaign of conquest. Sir, Vexmore said quietly, according to these records, the Galactic Council didn't disband. It voted to go into hiding and observe the galaxy until such time as a suitable species could be found to uphold council law and restore galactic peace. The implications hit Kexton like a physical blow. The humans are the council's chosen enforcers. Admiral Chen's voice continued, her tone taking on the weight of legal authority. By attacking our vessels, you have violated approximately 400 separate council statutes. Your empire has also been found guilty of 17 counts of genocide, 43 counts of planetary destruction, and over 600 counts of unauthorized territorial occupation. The sentence, as determined by council law, is the complete dissolution of your military forces and the liberation of all conquered territories. Around the Zephyrian fleet, space itself began to change. What had appeared to be empty vacuums suddenly revealed itself as anything but empty. Massive installations materialized, each one easily the size of a moon, their hulls bearing the ancient symbols of civilizations the Zephyrians had thought long dead. Weapons platforms that looked like they had been grown rather than built extended from these installations, their organic curves and flowing lines utterly alien to Zephyrian military doctrine. But it was the ships that made Kexton's tactical mind reel in disbelief. Vessels beyond anything in their databases began appearing throughout the system. Not just human ships, but the legendary dreadnoughts of the vegan consciousness, the living vessels of the Kepler Collective, even the crystalline warships of Andromache 7, all of them flying in perfect formation with the human fleet. They're alive, Kexton whispered as understanding dawned. The civilizations we thought we destroyed. They're all here. The revelation that followed was transmitted simultaneously to every Zephyrian vessel, not through their communication systems, but directly into the minds of every crew member. The psychic voice that spoke belonged to something vast and ancient, a collective consciousness that spanned multiple species and star systems. We are the vegan consciousness, the minds of 6 billion beings you believed you had exterminated. We are the Kepler Collective, the hive mind you thought you had scattered to the void. We are the crystal singers of Andromache, whose songs you silenced with plasma fire. We are not dead, Zephyrians. We have been preparing. Asterisk images flooded the minds of every Imperial soldier. The truth of their conquests became clear. The civilizations they had destroyed had been carefully staged illusions. Entire populations evacuated to hidden worlds. Military forces withdrawn to secret bases. Fake planets created through technology beyond Zephyrian understanding. Sacrificed to maintain the illusion of victory while the real species prepared for this moment. For 300 years, we have watched you commit genocide against shadows. We have studied your tactics, your weaknesses, your every strategic doctrine. And we have waited for you to make the ultimate mistake, attacking the species we chose to be our instruments of justice. Asterisk another human ship appeared directly in front of Kexton's flagship, this one massive beyond anything that should be able to exist. Its hull stretched nearly 50 kilometers in length, its surface covered in what appeared to be living metal that flowed and shifted like liquid mercury. From this vessel came the voice of Admiral Chun, but now it carried harmonics that suggested she was speaking for far more than just humanity. Admiral Kexton, you asked what we are? We are the species that the Galactic Council chose to inherit their mandate of peace. We are the civilization that spent 3,000 years preparing for the day when someone would challenge that peace. We are humanity, and we have been waiting for you. The human dreadnought began to change, its hull flowing and reshaping itself into configurations that hurt to look at directly. Weapons emerged that seemed to bend space around them, drawing energy from dimensions that existed parallel to normal reality. And from somewhere deep within the ship came a sound that every Zephyrian recognized, the subsonic rumble of a planet-killer weapon charging to full power. You wanted to see how humans fight when their backs are against the wall, Admiral Chin continued. But you made a fundamental error in your assessment. Our backs aren't against the wall, Admiral. Yours are. Kexton realized with crystal clarity that everything he had believed about human capabilities, about the war, about the very nature of the conflict they had started, was wrong. The humans hadn't been caught off guard by the Zephyrian invasion. They had been expecting it, preparing for it, perhaps even orchestrating it. Impossible, he said, but even as the word left his mouth, he knew it wasn't. The evidence was overwhelming. Humanity possessed technology centuries beyond what they had displayed. They commanded the loyalty of species the Empire thought extinct. They had manipulated the Zephyrians into attacking exactly when and where they wanted to be attacked. The humans had turned the entire war into an elaborate trap. Communications, Kexton ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. Give me the War Council. Priority Alpha. Maximum encryption. The holographic display shimmered, but instead of the familiar council chamber, it showed static. Then, impossibly, Admiral Chin's face appeared on the screen. I'm afraid the War Council is currently unavailable. Admiral, she said pleasantly. They're dealing with some unexpected visitors. Several thousand liberated worlds have decided to file formal complaints about their treatment under Imperial rule. The proceedings are expected to last several decades. The implication hit like a physical blow. The human fleet wasn't just here at Seoul. They were everywhere, simultaneously attacking every major Imperial installation across 17 star systems. This wasn't a defensive action. It was a perfectly coordinated liberation campaign that had been planned for centuries. You're not just defending Earth, Kexton said, the truth finally sinking in. You're ending our empire. Admiral Chin nodded gravely. The Galactic Council's final vote was unanimous, Admiral. The Zephyrian Empire is guilty of crimes against sapient life on a scale not seen since the Dark Wars 5 millennia ago. Your military forces are to be dismantled, your conquered territories liberated, and your leadership tried for crimes against the galaxy. Around the flagship, Kexton's fleet began reporting impossible readings. Zephyrian ships were simply stopping. Not destroyed, not damaged, but completely inert, floating dead in space as if every system had simultaneously failed. The humans weren't even firing on them anymore. They were simply switching them off like obsolete machinery. Ow! Kexton demanded. "We've had 300 years to study your technology, Admiral. Every ship you lost to unknown causes over the last 3 centuries? Those were our intelligence operations. We've been inside your computer networks, your manufacturing plants, your research facilities since before you conquered your first world. Every Zephyrian ship built in the last 3 centuries has humanity's backdoor access codes embedded in its core systems." The bridge around Kex then began to dim as his own flagship systems started shutting down one by one. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a red glow that seemed appropriate for the death of an empire. "Your species will be given a choice," Admiral Chen continued, her voice now coming from the ship's internal speakers as the communication array failed. "Peaceful reintegration into galactic society under council supervision, or isolation on your homeworld until you can demonstrate that you've learned to coexist with other species. Either way, your days of conquest are over." Kex then slumped into his command chair, the weight of total defeat settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Around him, his officers stared at their dead instruments in stunned silence. The most powerful military force in the galaxy had been neutralized without a single human casualty, their technology turned against them by a species they had dismissed as primitive. "Admiral," Vexmore called out, his voice hollow, "I'm receiving surrender instructions from the human fleet." They're quite comprehensive. Of course they were. The humans had thought of everything, planned for every contingency, prepared for every possible outcome except the one where the Zephyrians actually won. Because that outcome had never been possible from the moment they entered Sol space. Kex looked out at the human fleet surrounding his disabled ships and, finally, understood what Admiral Chun had meant about preparing for this moment. The humans hadn't been caught off guard by superior technology and overwhelming force. They had been the ones wielding superior technology and overwhelming force from the very beginning. The Zephyrian Empire had just learned the hardest lesson in galactic politics. Never pick a fight with a species that's been preparing for that fight longer than your entire civilization has existed. The war was over. Humanity had won before it even began. 3 days after the surrender of the 47th Pacification Fleet, Admiral Kex then found himself in a place that challenged everything he thought he knew about human nature. A rehabilitation facility on Luna, Earth's moon. Not a prison, not an interrogation center, but what the humans called a cultural exchange center, where former Imperial officers were learning about the civilizations they had believed they had destroyed. The facility itself was impossible. Vast gardens flourished in enclosed domes where alien flora from a dozen different worlds grew in harmony. Crystalline structures that sang with the voices of Andromache 7 rose next to flowing organic buildings that pulsed with the collective heartbeat of the vegan consciousness. And moving through it all were beings that should have been extinct, Keplerian collective drones working alongside crystal singers and vegan mind shapers in perfect cooperation. Kex sat in what the humans called a reflection chamber, a circular room with walls that displayed a holographic recreation of every world the Zephyrian Empire had conquered. But these weren't the burning, devastated planets he remembered from the victory reports. These were the worlds as they truly were, vibrant, alive, evacuated populations safely hidden while elaborate illusions played out the Empire's genocidal fantasies. "It must be difficult," said a voice behind him. Kex then turned to see a creature he recognized from intelligence briefings. A vegan consciousness node, one of the collective beings his empire had believed extinct. The being appeared roughly humanoid, but with translucent skin that showed the flow of neural pathways beneath, and eyes that held the wisdom of 6 billion linked minds. "Difficult doesn't begin to describe it," Kex then replied, his 4 arms hanging limp at his sides. "Everything I believed about my people's greatest victories lies. All of it." The vegan node settled into a chair that seemed to grow from the floor to accommodate its unique physiology. "Not lies, Admiral. Necessary deceptions. Your empire required the belief that it was conquering and destroying to maintain its social cohesion. We provided that belief while preserving actual life." "Why?" The question had been eating at Kex for days. Why go to such elaborate lengths to deceive us? Why not simply destroy our forces when we first left Zephyrian space? Because destruction teaches nothing. Because hatred breeds only more hatred. Because the Galactic Council learned, 5 millennia ago, that lasting peace cannot be imposed through force. It must be chosen through understanding. A new voice joined the conversation, distinctly human, but carrying harmonics that suggested connection to something larger. Kexton looked up to see Admiral Chun entering the chamber, but she was different now. Her eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire star systems, and when she moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around her. "Admiral Kexton," she said, inclining her head respectfully. "I wanted to speak with you personally about what happens next." "Next?" Kexton's mandibles clicked bitterly. "I'm a defeated military commander whose entire career was built on elaborate fantasies. What could possibly be next?" Admiral Chun settled into a chair across from him, and for a moment, Kexton saw not the terrifying military genius who had dismantled his empire, but simply a human being trying to communicate something important. "Admiral, do you know why humanity was chosen by the Galactic Council to inherit their mandate? Superior technology? Military capability? Political manipulation? None of those things." Chun leaned forward, her expression serious. "We were chosen because we understand what it means to be a young species making terrible mistakes. 3,000 years ago, when the Council first made contact with humanity, we were in the middle of what we now call the Resource Wars, a global conflict that nearly destroyed our own planet. We were violent, aggressive, and convinced that might made right." Kexton's eyes widened. This information wasn't in any Imperial database. "The Council could have conquered us easily," Chun continued. "Instead, they offered us a choice: learn to transcend our violent nature, or remain forever isolated on our single world. It took us 800 years to make that transition, Admiral. 8 centuries of struggle, failure, regression, and gradual growth before we were ready to join galactic civilization. And now you offer the same choice to us. Not just to you, to every species in your empire." Chun gestured to the holographic displays around them. "Every Zephyrian colony world, every client species, every conquered population, they all get to choose their own future. Some will want independence. Others will choose to remain part of a reformed Zephyrian confederation. Many will probably want to join the broader galactic community directly." The vegan node made a sound like wind chimes, which Kexton's translator rendered as agreement. "The pattern repeats across the galaxy, Admiral. Young species rise to power through violence, believing that conquest equals civilization. Eventually, they must choose to grow beyond that phase or face isolation and irrelevance. And if we choose isolation..." Admiral Chin's expression grew sad, but understanding. "Then you return to Zephyrian Prime and spend however long it takes learning to coexist peacefully with other sapient beings. Some species take decades to make that transition. Others take millennia. A few never make it at all. But you believe we can. I believe every sapient species has the potential for growth, Admiral. The question is whether they choose to exercise that potential." A new presence entered the chamber, and Kexton found himself looking at something that redefined his understanding of the possible. The being appeared to be made of living crystal that sang with harmonic frequencies, its form shifting and flowing like music given physical shape. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of stellar winds across neutron stars. "I am Symphony of Distant Suns, speaker for the crystal singers of Andromache 7. It said, each word carrying the weight of an entire civilization. Your forces believed they had silenced our world song 3 years ago." Kexton remembered that campaign. The Andromache system had been one of the Empire's most complete victories, an entire star system of crystal-based life forms eliminated in a single devastating bombardment. The after-action reports had described it as a masterpiece of military efficiency. The crystal cities we destroyed were resonant sculptures designed to mimic our true settlements, Symphony explained. Beautiful constructs that took centuries to grow, but ultimately expendable. Our real cities exist in dimensional phases your instruments cannot detect. We watched your bombardment, studied your tactics, and transmitted every detail to the human archives. Every species you encountered did the same thing, Admiral Chen added. For 300 years, every victory your empire achieved provided us with detailed intelligence about your military capabilities, your strategic thinking, your technological limitations. You weren't conquering the galaxy, Admiral. You were teaching us how to defeat you. The magnitude of the deception was staggering. Kex then tried to imagine the level of coordination required, the patience needed to maintain such an elaborate illusion across 3 centuries and 17 star systems. The planning alone must have involved millions of individuals across dozens of species. How many knew, he asked, about the specific details? Perhaps a few thousand beings across all involved civilizations. About the general plan? Every member of every species you believed you had conquered. They all knew they were safe, hidden in pocket dimensions and parallel realities while your forces fought shadows. Kex then stood abruptly, beginning to pace the chamber as the full implication sank in. The casualties, the Imperial soldiers who died in those conflicts, were fighting holographic projections and automated defense systems, the vegan node said gently. No sapient being died in any of your conquests, Admiral. We went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that. Even our own people, especially your own people. Admiral Chen's voice carried a weight of genuine sorrow. Every Zephyrian life lost was a failure of our planning. Every Imperial soldier who died fighting illusions was a tragedy we worked desperately to prevent. This revelation hit Kexton harder than anything else. The enemies he had spent his career fighting had been trying to protect his own soldiers, even while defeating them. The species he had believed primitive and barbaric had been demonstrating a level of ethical sophistication that his entire civilization lacked. Why tell us this? He demanded. Why reveal the deception now? You could have maintained the illusion indefinitely. Because the illusion was never the goal, Symphony of Distant Suns sang, its crystal form shifting into patterns that spoke of hope and new beginnings. The goal was always to create a moment where your species would be forced to confront the reality of what it had become and choose whether to grow beyond it. We brought you here to show you the truth, Admiral Chen said, because truth is the first step toward wisdom. Your empire can continue to exist, Admiral, but it will need to find a new foundation, one built on cooperation rather than conquest. Kex then stopped pacing and looked around the chamber at the representatives of civilizations he had believed extinct. They showed no hatred, no desire for revenge, no satisfaction at his empire's downfall. Instead, they radiated something he was only beginning to recognize as compassion. What would you have us do? Learn, the vegan node replied simply. Explore the galaxy not as conquerors, but as students. Discover what other species have to teach rather than what resources they possess. Find ways to contribute to galactic civilization rather than dominate it. And if we refuse, Admiral Chen stood, and for a moment Kex then saw behind the human facade to something vast and powerful that spanned multiple dimensions of existence. Then, you remain on Zephyrian Prime until your species matures enough to make a different choice. The galaxy is vast, Admiral. There's room for every kind of civilization, except those that try to eliminate all the others. A soft chime indicated that the session was ending. Around the chamber, holographic displays began showing images of Zephyrian worlds where Imperial infrastructure was being peacefully transferred to local governments, where freed populations were choosing their own destinies, where former enemies were working together to build something new. Your people are already making the choice, Admiral, Chun said as she prepared to leave. Across 17 star systems, Zephyrian colonies are voting to join the galactic community. Your military commanders are enrolling in peacekeeping academies. Your scientists are collaborating with species they once oppressed. The Empire, as you knew it, is over, but the Zephyrian people are just beginning to discover what they might become. After the others had left, Kex then remained alone in the reflection chamber, surrounded by images of worlds that lived when they should have been dead, populated by species that thrived where his people had believed only ashes remained. The defeat of his empire no longer felt like a military catastrophe. It felt like something else entirely, an opportunity. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kex then began to wonder what it would be like to explore the galaxy as something other than a conqueror. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Outside the chamber's windows, Earth turned slowly in the darkness, its cities glowing like stars. And, scattered throughout the Sol system, thousands of ships from dozens of species worked together to begin the complex task of rebuilding a galaxy that had forgotten how to live in peace. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. 2 years after the fall of the Zephyrian Empire, Admiral Kex then stood on the observation deck of the UES Harmony, watching the impossible sight of his homeworld as he had never seen it before. Zephyrian Prime was green. Where once the planet had been a fortress world of metal and stone covered in military installations and weapons factories, now vast forests stretched to the horizon. Rivers that had been diverted for industrial purposes had been restored to their natural courses. And rising from the landscape like gentle giants were structures that defied every principle of Zephyrian architecture. Organic buildings that seemed to grow from the earth itself, their surfaces covered in bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the planet's magnetic field. It's remarkable what a world can become when it's not preparing for constant war, said Admiral Chun, who now served as humanity's liaison to the reformed Zephyrian Commonwealth. She stood beside Kex then at the viewing port, watching shuttles ferry passengers between the orbital platform and the planet's surface. I barely recognize it, Kex then admitted, his 4 arms clasped behind his back in a gesture that had once signified military bearing, but now simply reflected contemplation. 2 years ago, this world housed the largest military academy in the galaxy. Now it houses the largest peacekeeping academy in the galaxy, Chun finished. Same purpose, different methods. Below them, groups of beings moved across the planet's surface. Not just Zephyrians, but representatives from dozens of species, all training together in the arts of conflict resolution, diplomatic intervention, and what the humans called aggressive peace maintenance. Former Imperial officers worked alongside crystal singers and vegan consciousness nodes, learning to prevent wars rather than wage them. The irony isn't lost on me, Kexton said. We spent 3 centuries building the most effective military force in the galaxy. Now we're using that expertise to make sure no one ever needs such a force again. Not irony, corrected a melodic voice behind them. They turned to see symphony of distant suns approaching, its crystalline form now bearing the insignia of the reformed Commonwealth's diplomatic corps. Evolution, your species' gift for military organization, is being applied to peacekeeping operations across the galaxy. Former Imperial logistics officers are coordinating refugee resettlement programs. Ex-Imperial strategists are developing conflict prevention protocols. Your people haven't lost their purpose. You found a better one. The observation was accurate, but felt strange to Kexton, who had spent 40 years defining himself through military conquest. The transition to peacekeeping had been anything but smooth for him personally. Learning to see former enemies as colleagues, understanding that strength could be measured in lives saved rather than worlds conquered, accepting that the greatest victories might be the conflicts that never happened, it had required a complete rebuilding of his worldview. "Admiral," said a new voice, this one carrying the harmonic frequencies of the vegan consciousness. "We're receiving final confirmation from the Kepler system. The last of the Imperial prison colonies has been converted to a voluntary research station. All former prisoners have been offered transportation to their home systems or the opportunity to remain as researchers." Kexton nodded, consulting the datapad that had replaced his former tactical displays. The numbers still amazed him. Across 17 star systems, not a single being had chosen revenge against their former Imperial captors. Instead, They had chosen reconstruction, research, and in many cases cooperation with the very Zephyrians who had once oppressed them. How do they do it? He asked, not really addressing anyone in particular. How do beings maintain such generosity toward those who cause them suffering? Admiral Chen considered the question seriously. Because they understand something your empire never learned. That hatred is a luxury civilizations can't afford. Every moment spent on revenge is a moment not spent building something better. A soft chime indicated an incoming message, and Kexthen's personal communication array activated. The holographic display showed the face of General Thexkara, the former head of the Imperial War Council, and now the Commonwealth's Director of Reconstruction Operations. Admiral Kexthen, she said, her forearms spread in the traditional Zephyrian greeting of respect. I'm transmitting the final reports from Operation Restoration. The last Imperial battle station has been successfully converted to a deep space research facility. All weapons have been removed, all military personnel have been retrained for scientific missions, and the first joint research teams are already aboard. The transformation of Imperial military assets into civilian infrastructure had been one of the most complex aspects of the transition. Massive dreadnoughts had been converted into mobile hospitals and research stations. Orbital weapons platforms had become communications relays and astronomical observatories. Even the feared-death ships, the Empire's planet-killing vessels, had been transformed into terraforming platforms capable of restoring devastated worlds to habitability. Casualties during the conversion process? Kexthen asked, still thinking like a military commander despite his new role. 0, Thexkara replied, and Kexthen could hear the wonder in her voice even after 2 years. Not one being was harmed during the entire operation. The human engineering teams maintained their commitment to preserving all life throughout the process. After the transmission ended, Kexthen found himself staring at his reflection in the viewing port surface. The being looking back at him still appeared Zephyrian, for arms, chitinous plates, burning eyes, but something fundamental had changed. The constant tension that had defined his species for centuries was gone, replaced by something he was learning to recognize as contentment. Admiral, Symphony of Distant Suns sang, "We're receiving a priority communication from the Galactic Council. They're requesting your presence at an emergency session." Kexthen's old military instincts immediately activated. Emergency sessions usually meant crisis, conflict, or catastrophe. But as he followed the others to the communication center, he reminded himself that he was no longer a military commander responding to threats. He was a peacekeeping coordinator responding to opportunities to prevent conflict. The communication center of the Harmony was itself a testament to the new galactic cooperation. Holographic displays showed real-time data from monitoring stations scattered across known space, tracking not troop movements or weapon deployments, but refugee movements, resource distribution, and early warning signs of potential conflicts. The center was staffed by beings from a dozen different species, all working together to maintain what humans called aggressive peace. The main display activated, showing the familiar amphitheater of the Galactic Council chambers. But unlike the ancient, solemn assemblies of the past, this council session buzzed with energy and purpose. Thousands of beings filled the chamber, representatives not just of the traditional council species, but of every civilization that had gained or regained freedom in the past 2 years. Elder Wisdom Keeper of the Deep, the ancient artificial intelligence that served as the council's moderator, materialized as a shifting geometric pattern that somehow conveyed both authority and warmth. Commonwealth Representative Kexthen, the AI said, its voice carrying harmonics that translated perfectly into every language simultaneously, "We have received a request for assistance that requires your unique expertise." A new display activated, showing a star system Kexthen didn't recognize. 12 planets orbiting a binary star, with clear signs of advanced civilization on at least 3 worlds. But the energy readings were all wrong. Massive military buildups were occurring on every inhabited planet, Weapons systems were being activated, and fleet movements suggested preparation for a system-wide war. The hegemony of Trix, Elder Wisdom Keeper, continued. A confederation of 3 species that has remained isolated from galactic civilization for over a millennium. Our long-range monitoring indicates they are on the verge of a devastating internal war that could destroy all life in their system. Why contact us? Kex then asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Because 6 months ago, they detected the approach of what they believe to be an invasion fleet, former Imperial vessels that are now part of the Commonwealth's Deep Space Research Initiative. They have interpreted this as preparation for conquest and are mobilizing for total war against what they see as the return of the Zephyrian Empire. The irony was painful. Ships that had once been instruments of conquest, now serving peaceful purposes, were about to trigger the very kind of devastating conflict they had been redesigned to prevent. Admiral Chun studied the tactical displays with the kind of intensity she had once reserved for planning military operations. What's their military capability? Substantial, the AI replied. They possess planet-killing weapons, dimensional warfare capabilities, and the kind of total war doctrines that could render their entire system uninhabitable within days of conflict beginning. And they won't respond to diplomatic contact? They believe any attempt at communication is a psychological warfare operation designed to weaken their resolve before the invasion begins. Kex then felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders, but it was different now. Instead of planning how to defeat an enemy, he found himself thinking about how to save potential friends from their own fear. What do you need from us? Elder Wisdom Keeper's geometric pattern shifted into configurations that suggested both hope and urgency. We need you to do what the Commonwealth does best, convince them that there's a better way than war. But you'll need to do it in a way that doesn't trigger their defensive systems or confirm their belief that they're under attack. A peaceful intervention in hostile space, Kex then mused. 3 species preparing for total war, all of them convinced that any outside contact is a prelude to invasion. Exactly the kind of situation the Commonwealth was created to handle, Admiral Chen said. The question is, are you ready to put 2 years of peacekeeping training to the ultimate test? Kex then looked around the communication center at the beings who had once been his enemies and were now his closest colleagues. Crystal Singers worked alongside human technicians. Vegan consciousness nodes coordinated with former Imperial strategists. And at the center of it all, the shared commitment to preserving life and preventing conflict that had become the Commonwealth's defining principle. How long do we have? Based on their current mobilization rate, approximately 72 hours before they begin active hostilities against each other. 72 hours. The same time frame as Empire had once given to species facing pacification. But this time, instead of delivering an ultimatum, they would be preventing one. Then we launch immediately, Kexon decided. Symphony, prepare your diplomatic protocols. Admiral Chun, coordinate with the human rapid response teams. I'll contact General Thexkara about deploying peacekeeping assets. As the team dispersed to prepare for what might be the Commonwealth's greatest challenge, Kex then remained at the central display, studying the trick system and thinking about the path that had brought him to this moment. 2 years ago, he had been a military commander preparing to destroy a planet. Today, he was a peacekeeping coordinator preparing to save 3. The transformation of his people, his civilization, and himself was complete. They were no longer the species that conquered through strength. They had become the species that preserved through wisdom. Outside the viewports, his homeworld continued its impossible transformation, green forests spreading across landscapes that had once known only war. And, in the depths of space, former instruments of destruction moved toward a system on the brink of catastrophe, carrying not weapons of conquest, but tools of salvation. Admiral Kex then smiled, an expression his species had learned from humans and made their own. For the first time in his life, he was truly proud to be Zephyrian, not because of what his people had conquered, but because of what they had chosen to become. The former empire was dead. The Commonwealth was alive. And, somewhere in the trick system, three species were about to learn that sometimes the most effective way to win a war was to convince everyone involved that the war didn't need to happen at all. The real test of everything they had learned was about to begin.